Good morning, everyone. Hope everybody's having a good week leading up to Christmas. Hope you've got all your shopping done. I'm pretty sure at our house we have everything done. Might be the first time in ever that we've actually got everything done before the week of. So we're just kind of wrapping up everything. Anyway, today we want to jump in. I've had some things stirring in me. I want to kind of jump into this week. We're leading into Christmas. And it really has to do with the fact of redemption and Jesus as he comes into the world. And not only as he comes into the world, but as he comes inside of our life, what he begins to do in our life, what he begins to build in our life. And we're going to kind of I'm going to touch on Ecclesiastes a little bit, and then we're going to go to, we're going to jump up into Luke. And then I just want to expound on this a little bit, because what we have to understand, I think in redemption and as we're moving forward in our walk with the Lord, is that when he begins something within us, it begins to build something. And that thing that begins to build something within us begins to bring life to places. And that when that life comes within us, then we have to begin to either yield to the life and allow it to build what it wants to bring, or we have to actually deny the life that it wants to build for us, and we continue to stay in dead works and dead places in our life that aren't renewed. So today we're going to kind of touch on this, because I think that even in our deep core of our beings, we're trying to be satisfied. Like, we want to be satisfied on a daily basis. We want to be satisfied in what we do as work. We want to be satisfied in what we do in our playtime and our recreation time. We want to be satisfied in every part of our life. And so we continue to pursue satisfaction. There's something within us we're trying to fulfill and satisfy. And I think the mystery is that the Creator created us, and as he created us only to be satisfied fully within him. John Piper says, God's most glorified in us when we're most satisfied in him. And so I think in that satisfaction is the creation has been wired to only be satisfied when the Creator is fully creating life within them and around them. So that's kind of where I want to go today. I want to shape that and form that so that as we move into the holidays, there's going to be a lot of things that are happening in Christmas. Christmas time, when we're receiving a lot of gifts, we're going to want those gifts to actually fulfill something within us. We're going to want it to do something in us. And maybe the time off, we're wanting it to fulfill something within us. And most definitely, it'll be a refreshing time if you're able to unplug from your work, if you're able to have a little vacation, if you're able to do that. But all those things we'll probably grasp for to be satisfied and renewed in those places. And they actually will not do that unless they're properly ordered. So I want to kind of scripturally show us a little bit of that today, and then maybe kind of help and see that. So let's start in Ecclesiastes real quick. So turn to Ecclesiastes. I'm just going to click Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I'm going to be in the New King James for that. And if you don't know where it is, go to Proverbs and hang a right. Next book over. And just this verse right here, Ecclesiastes 3:11, this is where we're going to start. And this is where the tension becomes. So, Solomon's writing this. And Solomon, he's the wisest man ever, apart from Jesus, on the earth. He has the most riches. He had many, many, many wives, concubines, and different. So from a worldly standpoint, Solomon was the guy of all guys. He had everything, and he had all this stuff. And this is what he says in Ecclesiastes 3:11, because I think honestly today, in any generation, in any time of the world, every generation, we're seeking as creations, as living beings, we're seeking to be satisfied or fulfilled. That's never going to go away. It's always something, and God has just wired us not to be fulfilled by anything other than himself and within his Son and his Spirit. But Ecclesiastes 3:11, this is kind of where it gets framed at. It says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. So it says here, he's put eternity in our hearts. So there's something that's been placed in our hearts that continues to cry out and long for something, but it doesn't have a satisfaction. And so I think so often we look for different stuff and different things to fulfill those places, even coming into this season. And honestly, the only thing that fulfills it is our Creator. And even if you want to take that even a little further, it's Christ, it's Jesus within us that actually fulfills that place. So if you can begin to frame this picture all through time, we'll go back to Genesis, begin to walk that out whenever Adam and Eve were in the garden walking with God and the fall happened. In Genesis chapter 1 and 2, 3, 3 the fall happened. And so you see that, and you see all through the Old Testament where there's all of this life happening. And so we enter into the New Testament, we're entering into this season of birth of Jesus. And there's this thing that that God's birthing in that season of time in Scripture that actually is supposed to be part of the satisfaction of that thing that's within us. And so what I want you to write this little phrase down right here. And part of this was I was reading this today in Oswald Chambers' Utmost for His Highest. And one thing he says, he makes a couple of statements. So here's one statement that he makes. He says, the inner reality of redemption is that it creates. And so we're talking about satisfying this place within me that's not satisfiable. And then Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that eternity has been placed in our hearts. And we're trying to search out what is it, and we're trying to be satisfied. And this redemption that comes through Jesus, this redemption that comes back into the world, that redeems us and makes us right back with the Father, that aligns us back with our Creator, because all redemption does is realigns us and places us back in, and it puts this life back within us. And he says, Oswald Chambers says, the inner reality of redemption is that it creates. And so what you want to do is think about this, is that when we say yes to Jesus, because the gospel, when it's preached and taught, it's not a rescue from hell, it's to introduce you to your true life, your truly who you are, your DNA, like it's to introduce us into that. And so when we begin to accept what the true gospel is to find life, then we begin to understand that when this life comes within us, it comes to create within us. So if you can think about this, is when it comes to create within us, it comes to bring something and to begin to dismantle even our personal lives, and begins to open up and going like it brings its own thing to create. And he makes another statement here, which I think is just good. He says redemption, as redemption creates, talking about this creative part of life, the life of God in us, as it creates this life of God in us, because when God comes in, he's fully God within us. The Spirit comes in, Jesus inhabits, he's fully within us. But he creates, there's something that begins to transform who we are in the natural world. And it also makes this statement right here. He says, as redemption creates the life of God in us, it also creates the things which belong to that life. And so I want us to think about it this way. A seed, like an acorn seed. An acorn, whenever you have it, an acorn has all the DNA and the fullness of life within it in a little seed. I mean, it's only like the size of my thumb or so, depending on what type of oak tree you're coming from. And so in that little acorn, all of life for that tree is bound up all in that one little seed, that one little place. And all the provision for that life to manifest in the world is all stuck in that one little seed. And so when you plant that seed, it begins to grow, it begins to bring up. And so when it comes out of the ground, it goes from a seed, it goes to a twig, and it begins to put leaves off, and then it begins to grow, it begins to put bark off, and then it's bigger and bigger and bigger. It all just did not happen in a moment, but it all was contained within one little seed. And so redemption is the gospel. When the gospel comes into our life, it has every part that we need wrapped up in this package that begins to bring life and creates as we go through time. And so that's why we never fully manifest all of who Jesus is when we first meet him, when we first walk with him, because we've not been able to walk with him and him walk with us in order to manifest and bring to life the things that are dead, or the things that aren't formed in him or like him. And so often we just get rescued, we just get saved, and we go like, okay, I get born again, that's the gospel, I'm rescued. If I believe in what the gospel says, then I'm rescued, and I've entered into the kingdom of heaven. And so now I begin to live this life. And then I think as we live this life, then we go back. We receive Christ as a rescue. We don't receive him as life. And when it becomes a rescue and not life, then we're wondering why all of a sudden I'm not fulfilled. I'm not walking in this fullness, in this full place. It's because when salvation comes, we have all the full attributes in the spirit of salvation, but in the natural, it comes in seed form. That's why the things that we believe we have to steward, and things that we believe we have to water, things that we believe we have to continue to walk with. Another simple illustration is this. If you don't plant a garden, without actually going to it and putting the seed in the ground and covering the seed up and actually coming back with water and continuing to grow and tend to it. Because if you plant a seed in the ground and you don't tend to it, a bird can come by and dig up the seed. A squirrel can come by and dig it up. So you have to deal with all the different things that are around that seed. Now, is it to say that salvation is that, is it that tenuous? Is it that shaky? No. But the idea that when redemption comes, it creates life within us. It's also a partnership that as we rely on the gospel, we rely on Jesus within our life to create this place, that it begins to build this life and build this reality in him. That's really what part of this is what I want us to capture this morning, is that when Jesus entered the world, I'm going to read this passage real quick because it's a great time of year to read it. When he entered the world, he began to manifest what he had already seen from the beginning of time. He began to come in and say, okay, now I'm moving things in the natural into a completely different place. And now I'm making myself known. I'm opening up the mystery of heaven. And I'm beginning to open this up. And he came in the form of a child, in a form of a child, like he became like us and came to the earth and began to walk and be like who we are. And so that's the part of that we need to grasp, is that when we are born again, when the gospel redeems us, that it's a continual working out of that place. It's a continual chasing the places out and knowing that when I believe in the gospel, that it brings its own life to those parts of my life. So read this passage real quick. So anyway, there's this tension, and we're going to read this passage. Go to Luke. I'm going to read this passage at the birth of Jesus and kind of look at that for just a second, just to introduce as he comes into the world what he brings in to bring, because the tension is this. If we go back to Ecclesiastes 3:11, he has made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that they cannot find out the work of God, what he does from beginning to the end. And so I think the lack of understanding that we have of what's God doing with this. I thought redemption was this. I thought my salvation meant this. And he's tucked this thing of eternity away in our hearts. And he's put it there. And it's this thing that can only be scratched. It's like this insatiable itch that can never be touched. It's like this place on your back. Sometimes you get an itch on your back and you can't reach it. It's like it's way back here and it gets way back over here, and you got back scratchers, and you got, like, you ask your wife to scratch it, no, move there, move there, move there. In all these places, this is this thing that's within us. It can only be satisfied by Jesus. It can only be satisfied by Christ. It can only be satisfied not by the one who came to, quote, rescue us, but the one who came to actually bring life, to line us back up with the Father. And look, it's the amazing thing is this to me is like when we read Luke chapter 2, this is how he decided to start the story. And which is absolutely amazing to me. So if you're not understanding the fact that you're not being satisfied in Jesus right now, as odd as it is that if you just look at the story of Jesus and the story that actually how the gospel comes into the world, the story itself is, you got Mary, who's a virgin, who's somewhere between 13, 15, 16 years old. And betrothed to Joseph, and the angel comes and speaks to her and says, hey, the Holy Spirit's going to come over, you're going to be pregnant. And the Holy Spirit comes over and she becomes pregnant. And so she's carrying the child, and now Joseph is betrothed to him. And like in the culture, it's like you're shamed in the culture for like you should put her away. You're already, and he says, no, the angel comes to him and says, no, don't put her away. And so this is the beginning of how God decided to like manifest Jesus in the world, which to me is an amazing story. And so maybe let's don't be so surprised about how he begins to shape our life and how he begins to enter our life and move things and bring life in, because that's an improbable story. I mean, you begin to look at that story and go like, I would probably do that a different way. So look, here's the story. Listen to this. This is how it starts out. She's already pregnant with Jesus, and this is kind of the birth of Jesus. So it's Luke chapter 2, verse 1. And we're going to read through about verse 7. It says, during those days, the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus ordered that the first census to be taken throughout his empire. Quirinius was the governor of Syria at that time. Everyone had to travel to his and her hometown to complete the mandatory census. So Joseph and his fiancée Mary left Nazareth. Now she's with child right now. Left Nazareth to a village in Galilee and journeyed to their hometown in Judah, to the village of Bethlehem, King David's ancient home, because it is prophesied he comes out of Bethlehem. And they were required to register there since they were both direct descendants of David. Mary was pregnant and nearly ready to give birth. When they arrived in Bethlehem, Mary went into labor, and there she gave birth to her first son. After wrapping the newborn in strips of cloth, they laid him in a feeding trough, since there was no available space in the upper room in the village. Now, an odd way for Jesus to enter into the world. Number one, entered in through a virgin. Just a little context there. I'll just give you a little quick scientific context there, is that a child doesn't share blood with a mother. So scientifically, the blood doesn't mix together. And so what happens is the child has its own blood, and so it never mixes with the mother. And so if you think about this, the father and the mother, when a typical birth is happening, they share the DNA of mother and the father, and the blood right there is out of that place. But there's a pure place, because Jesus was conceived by the Holy Spirit, that his blood was pure. There was no impurities in here. That made him, number one, like an eligible sacrifice, because the impurity was not found within him, because even of the scientific ability of them not to share blood together. But so she's pregnant here, she's getting ready to give birth, and this is an odd thing to enter into the world this way. And he shows up here, and she's going to give birth, and she's giving birth. She gives birth in this place, in this trough, and lays the child in a trough. And so when he talks about the upper room in the village, this upper room in the village is, so this would have been like a house. It would have been like an inn or a hotel. It would have been like the houses in the villages. And as they came into the world, they came to the city, all the houses would have had an area underneath, like a basement to us. And underneath it'd be like a workroom. And underneath that area, there would be a trough. There might be a trough for feeding. They might bring sick animals in there to recover before they send them back out in the pasture. You might store things down there. And so what had happened was, this is a season of everybody was actually coming in for the census, and everybody's visiting for holidays. Everything is in for this time of a season. And as they're gathering in, all the upper rooms, meaning all the areas you typically inhabit and sleep and work in and be in, they were all inhabited. And so it says, after wrapping the newborn baby in stripes of cloth, they laid him in a feeding trough, since there was no available space in the upper room in the village. Now, I'm just telling you, that's odd. It's odd how Jesus comes into the world. And why am I making such a big deal about this? Because I want us to understand is that when Jesus comes into our personal lives, when he comes in, we say yes, come make your home in me, come abide in me. It's you don't even know what's actually, you begin to accept him, he begins to build his life within your life, and he begins to build life within you and around you. It's going to be different than what you can ever imagine. You can't anticipate or expect exactly how it's going to come out. I mean, that's why faith is so important. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says we walk by faith, not by sight. And I think so often when we receive Jesus as the gospel, the one who brings life, the one who aligns us back with our Father, when he comes, I think we have an anticipation or expectation of exactly what that's supposed to be. And as opposed to kind of relying and just being kind of just resilient enough to accept the fact that when he comes, he's bringing life that will actually create something within us. And so part of my encouragement today as we're moving into Christmas, or the holiday of celebrating the birth of Jesus, the birth of our Savior, to look how he came into the world and how he began to build. Even as he lived his life, and you go through the Gospels, look at his life, it's so different than what you would even expect. Even towards the end, everybody thinks, last week I did the road to the Emmaus in the last part of Luke 24, and they were talking about him not even as if he was the Messiah, but as this one who would rescue them and who would realign things and change things. I think so often, Jesus brings, back to this quote from Oswald Chambers. He says the reality is that redemption brings or creates within us. And when Jesus creates something within us, he also begins to satisfy those places within us, and he begins to open life up for us within it, and it begins to bring renewal in those places. And so this gospel thing, where Jesus says, John 14:6, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No way comes to the Father except through me. This gospel message that there's life found within him, and when that life comes, it creates. I want us to think about that and be renewed in our thought process on that. Is that look at your personal life right now. It's like the only places that I'm not finding life being created within my life. In other words, when Jesus says, I want to work in your area right here, Mark, I want to work in this area of your life. I mean, I can keep the gardener out. I can kick him out. I can say, no, you're not working there. I don't want you to touch that place. So regardless if I have the tools and the information or the ability to have life created in those places, if I say no, he's not going to create there. Now, he might discipline me, but whenever I'm wanting to move something in my life, I have to willfully say, hey, Father, will you come and help me redirect this part of my life? Because you bring life, and you're responsible for creating this dissatisfaction or this place that needs fulfilling, and only you can do that as you bring life and you bring understanding. And so it's only when we yield to the fact that God is within us, bringing redemption through Christ in our life, and he's bringing something to be created within us. It's only when we yield to those places that true life comes out of us. Like you want to know how not to be anxious. You want to know how not to be stressed. You want to know how to stay in peace. You want to know how to not worry. All these things or we use Jesus as the antidote or the medicine that cures it. And yes, he's the source of all peace. He's the source of no worry. He's the source of all of that. But what happens is that when he comes into our life, we maneuver him around how we want him to meet and satisfy what we want, instead of letting him come in and create life within us and begin to ask and partner with him to work within our personal lives. Continually, as we go in here in Luke chapter 2 and see how he comes into the world, it's a crazy way that he comes in. No room even being made for him in any reasonable place. It's like we would never You come to my house, I would never put you in my garage and say, hey, just go sleep in my garage. And you're pregnant. Like, I've never put you in my, if you walk in my garage right now, you can't even walk in my garage right now. It's got everything in my garage, everything. I can walk in and make excuses why it looks the way it does, but I would have to do a lot of work just to be able to put you in the garage. And the very fact that they said, there's no room up here for you, but you can stay downstairs. It's like Jesus comes in so unannounced and so under the radar and so unassuming, and he just comes in. And I think in our personal lives, when we say yes to Jesus, we're expecting something, and he just comes in, he just begins to build. He puts his tool belt on and he says, okay, now let's go to work. Ecclesiastes 3:11. There's this thing, there's eternity that's been put within our hearts. It's been put there, and we're, as creations, the Creator is the only thing that can satisfy that. It's the only thing. And so my encouragement today is that, going back to the oak tree illustration and going back to the acorn, everything within the acorn, it has an oak tree that's 100 years old, came from a little bitty seed. And we have within us the kingdom. We have the literal DNA of the kingdom within us. And it has the ability to build our lives in such a way that it becomes strong, it produces fruit, it provides for those around us, it begins to exhibit the kingdom, it exhibits peace, it exhibits rest. The only thing that keeps that from happening is that we try to satisfy the deepest longings in our hearts. We try to satisfy those places with other things. And so today I want to encourage us, listen, there's a deep place within us that can't be satisfied, but only in life can it be satisfied. It can only be satisfied through our Creator and through His Son, through the redeeming part of that. It can only be satisfied by Him.
Thanks again, everyone, for being with us this week. Now we're going to move into a time of discussion with our groups where we'll reflect on the sermon, reflect on this past year, and look towards the new year. Quick reminder that we will be in the building this coming Sunday for service, so we hope to see you then.